Anyway, welcome again to Game Community Management very first webinar. I'm Joseph. I'm a podcast host at GCM Hub. I'm actually very honored today to be moderating this. So before we actually go everything in, let me quickly do a quick introduction of GCM. GCM Hub is a go-to hub for community managers to gather and share information on their vital trait. So do scan our QR codes on the screen to follow us more on LinkedIn, where we'll actually post more content and you can engage in a discussion with fellow community managers. Also, subscribe to our newsletter to keep up with our latest podcasts, articles, or even events such as this. Also, a quick shout out to any members of the audience who wish to contribute to the community. Please reach out to me at the end of the webinar. I'll be more than happy to chat on how we could potentially work together. So this event is proudly sponsored by Yodo1. Yodo1 is a game platform company that has been helping developers better market, manage, and monetize their games since 2011. Some of the things they do include publishing, where they help games publish, pretty straightforward. Branding games, big, where they help put IP license into games for great games out there. H5 Games, where they publish games, H5 Games in China. Managed ad services, MAS, where we help developers all over the world to increase and optimize their ads revenue. And finally, KT Play, which is actually something that's really, really close to my heart because it's something that I'm working on. And it's also something that I believe would be more relevant to the audience. KT Play is an in-game community. The whole goal is actually to bring community to your players and making it a part of the gaming experience. So a well-managed community is the ticket to increase better game metrics. That's something that we're going to talk more about. It also allows you to interact with players, get a feedback, and achieve a much higher level of engagement. So what I believe is instead of using traditional community tools, why do you actually leave a gamer's decision to go to your community up to chance? So with KT Play, you can proactively engage every player to become part of the community. And because it's within the game, all the behavior in the community are tied to the game ID, and that's where kind of the magic happens. Feel free to reach out to me after this webinar as well, and I'll be more than happy to talk more about this with you guys. So, Nico and Tara, let's start this session proper. Today, we are all here to talk about the topic of understanding your game's full potential with data-driven community management. I'm very, very happy to have with us Tara and Nico. So perhaps, Tara, you would like to go ahead and introduce yourselves first?
Okay, on the spotlight. Yeah, so I'm currently the Director of Community and Player Support at Behavior Interactive. I've worked kind of all over the world and all over the industry, everything from PC to console to mobile to web games. Yeah, so it's been quite an adventure. I've been in community for the past 10-ish years, and just recently, back in January, joined Behavior Interactive to head up their community and player support efforts.
Awesome. So how about Nico? Will you do introduction of yourself as well?
Sure. Hey, I'm Nicolas Nottin. So I've been working in the industry for maybe 10 years now, 7 in community management and development. Also on PC, console, and mobile. So I'm now the head of community development at the Phoenix Lighthouse. Yeah, and I love community and the direction we are trying to take as well, which we're going to talk about in this session. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So I just want all our listeners to know that this is very much a conversation. So if there's any questions you would like to ask at all, feel free to put your questions under the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And also from time to time, you'll be posting polls to kind of get an understanding of what our listeners are interested in and what are your thoughts on certain issues. Do participate in it as well. And finally, feel free to use the chat feature to talk to fellow audience to kind of like share your opinions. So without further ado, let us go to the very first question of today's event. Question number 1. So this is more of to Tara and Nico. So how big a role do you guys think data analytics should actually play in community management? So perhaps
I can start off.
Go ahead.
So I'll be honest, when I first started in community, the idea of working data and analytics into my community strategy made me cringe. I was like, but it's all about the feelings. It's all about how people feel about the community. As my career progressed, I started to see the real value in data and analytics, in part because sometimes you'll get, say, a sliver of the community that's very, very vocal that's drowning out everyone else. So you release a change to the game, there's a small sliver of your community that's saying, oh, this is the worst thing ever, you've ruined the game. But when you go and look at the actual data and analytics, you can see that there's actually more people playing the game. They're playing for longer. They're just not the vocal ones out there. So being able to pair that to understand that sentiment is not everything. Sentiment is important, and you do still need to find ways to address that. But it does prevent you from making massive game changes based on a very small minority. So as I've gotten older and started leading teams, data and analytics has become much, much more important for, one, validating and helping to elevate the status of community within the organization.
Yeah, it's a really good summary. Pretty much the same as well. I think the fact that we work with a lot of different departments as well, marketing, UA, PM, everyone has data. So same, I think at the beginning, I was like, oh, numbers, it's all about the feelings. But I realized as well that we spend so much time looking at what is happening in our games or what has happened, but we don't spend enough time trying to understand why it is happening. We don't spend enough time trying to understand why players do what they do or how they feel about it. So yeah, it's a pretty big part of community management. I say it's one of the layers of community management. Yeah, really important for me and pretty much any organizations out there.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm just quite curious. So you guys feel that data analytics is quite important for community management. So are there certain examples perhaps there or use scenarios where you think that is very key in this situation?
Yeah, I think the example Tara gave about trying to verify sentiment is I think a key one. Mostly because when you engage with those minor communities on maybe forums or social media platforms, you actually don't really know who you're talking to. Mm-hmm. In fact, sometimes you're even talking with people who don't even have your game, or people who don't play your game anymore. So, and that's where you're trying to, you take this sentiment and then you try to get a larger feedback sample from your active player base. And that's where it makes a big difference for me. So that then I can go back to the developers and tell them, well, this is how they feel about a change you made, or this is the kind of stuff they are looking for. And you can, you can prioritize maybe, the kind of community requests that people are after based on, I just want to see what our top spenders say about this, or I want to see what everyone is saying about this. And that helps actually the development team to, let's say designers or coders and so on, to, make maybe better decisions when they are trying to work on a roadmap. So that's one good example as well. It's trying to verify the interest in different things, but also the sentiment. That's a really key one, especially when you've got a lot of people asking you, how many people complain about this? And you're like, I don't know, maybe 100. Does it really matter? But now we're actually able to tell them, well, 10,000 people say they agree with the fact that this was a bad decision. And all of those 10,000 people, 8,000 were spenders, which represented X amount of your revenue. So that's a pretty big change for them, for the team.
How about Tara? Anything else to add?
I think one of the most critical things, and this will be super useful for community folks out there who are dealing with this pressure where the company knows that community management is important, but they still view it heavily as a cost center. So the budget for community is never there. You're having a hard time getting tools. if you're able to quantify the impact of community engagement on retention, all of that goes away. People stop questioning why community is important. When you can directly show that, okay, people who participate in the community retain 3 times as long, they spend twice as much money, they play more sessions of the game each day versus people who don't participate in the community, your value within the organization skyrockets, because everybody knows that, you know, marketing is acquisition. They get people in the game. Marketing has a nice big budget. It's kind of well respected. Communities traditionally kind of been in this gray area where everyone knows that it's important, but without being able to put you know, an actual monetary value or a quantitative value on it, it's so much easier to say, like, do you really need $5,000 to go to TwitchCon? Like, is that really important for the community? So this helps justify the value of not just, you know, the individual within the org, but community as part of the holistic game dev lifecycle. Like that this is the retention side. Marketing is bringing people in, their acquisition. Community keeps people in. So marketing has to spend less to get new people. So when you can start putting those numbers out there, community becomes not a cost sink, it becomes a revenue center, and that is magical.
Yeah. I was just about to say, and at the end of the day, we can prove that community is more than the glorified, you know, babysitting tool. Basically, we can have a real impact, and yeah, we can prove that it has an impact on product KPIs, which is extremely valuable. And it's kind of like, I don't really like this term, but community is kind of marketing for existing users, while traditional marketing is trying to get them in. And I think I really like that Tara mentioned that, because I think it's also important to remember that community can also bring people in, but it could also be very hard. But there again, we can find ways to use data to prove how community is helping to get people in. I think one of the examples I really like recently is Hand Showdown, where they did their drop campaign on Twitch. The game accounts, the Steam accounts, the Twitch account, everything was linked. I'm pretty confident that was also driven by their community department. And then at the end of the day, their community managers can show this is what we have done, and this is the quality of the users we are bringing, but also this is the impact that it had on existing users. That's wonderful. It's like really exciting.
So can I understand as like after you guys like embrace more data approach towards community, it kind of like eased your day-to-day job, so it's easier for you guys to like convince people that what you're doing is important and to get resources. Am I right to summarize it in that sense? Or am I not hitting the mark?
I mean, there's always going to be discussion around, you know, resources. Resources are sometimes sparse on projects, especially depending on scale. However, it does change the conversation a lot when you can come to the table with like, okay, well, if we don't do this, then we lose this level of insight, we lose this level of engagement with our players. This will be the impact of that. It's a lot harder to devalue it or deprioritize it as a result. So it's not that it's a silver bullet, but it's the closest thing I've found to it, to at least stopping that conversation of like, oh, do we really want to invest in community? You know, when you have case studies that you can show that investing in community does mean that you keep people longer, they spend more, etc. You know, it's kind of a no-brainer, because you're either going to have to keep paying UA to bring new users in, or you could keep the users that you already have that already like the game, that are already happy. One of those is a slightly easier justification in my mind.
Yeah, and also for me, when I used to work in also departments where we did not have a lot of resources, it also helped to maybe justify not doing what the organization expected as well. So it helped me. So let's say the company believed in community, but didn't understand how much we need to do community properly. So it kind of helped me as well to say, well, there is clearly interest in doing this from the company, but doing this is also cost XYZ. And I could also do this, which is a little bit cheaper. So it also helps, yeah, negotiating this kind of stuff. I think if there are community managers in the list right now, I'm sure everyone has been asked, why are we not on this or that? You can go and say, well, because with this, I can impact XYZ in the game by talking with the players or doing this and that. So that also helped me as well. And that helped the organization. Data is really important for that as well. So awesome. Yeah, using data to make a business case, but also sometimes to protect yourself in a way.
Well, I mean, data is hard numbers, you can't change it. So I actually have a question instead. So the reason I have this question on is because I am aware, like for example, many community managers are like Terra in the past, where you feel that community is all about interpersonal relationships, numbers don't do justice to that kind of stuff. So what would you like to say? What do you think is the best way to kind of like show these people, or let me just show this another way. So how would you try to convince this group of people saying that, hey, they should actually consider a data approach for community? Did you guys get my question?
Yeah, I get the question. I'm just thinking for a moment. I think some of it is just starting to get your feet wet with it and how much it will change your perception. So one of the earliest perception changes for me was working on Facebook games, and the most vocal people about, I don't understand why people ever spend money in this game, constantly berating the idea that there were any purchases in the game very publicly, very loudly. They were absolutely 100% the people who spent lots of money in the game. And understanding that does change your approach in how you deal with them from the community perspective, because you're not taking that back to the dev team and saying, oh my God, nobody wants to spend money in the game. These people are so angry, because you know that they're lying, It's just a bit of a psychological thing where people don't, at least at that point in time, I think people felt a little more ashamed about spending money in games, so they would project and put this out there and try to rile other people up. Meanwhile, they're absolutely the people who are spending the money in the game. So, even just seeing that made me question more what, the raw sentiment was and where it was coming from. And being able to have some access to data to be able to verify against that really shifts how you approach that from a content perspective. It doesn't mean that there aren't things that you do to address some of that negative sentiment, especially if it's, it's a new feature that you put out that a very small sliver of people just absolutely hate, but the rest of the community loves. It may still be important to address that very small sliver, because when you look at the data, that very small sliver is people who have played the game since day one every single day. They're super invested. This change disproportionately affects them. It may still be worth having that conversation, but without the information behind it, you're kind of flying blind. You don't know who those people are. You don't know how much they've played. And to Nico's point earlier, you don't know if they're even still playing. People will hang out, especially if they have a grudge against the game. They will hang out for years afterwards, being a negative sentiment sink to try to show you up. So when you're able to pair that back to like, okay, this guy hasn't played the game in 6 months, we're not going to prioritize his feedback. Or, maybe that's to spin it more positively. Okay, this guy hasn't played the game in 6 months, but he's obviously still invested. How do we flip him? How do we get him back in the game? What's really the underlying problem here? So data doesn't mean that you don't still care about people and you don't still care about the sentiment. It just gives you better tools to understand where it's coming from and the best way to approach it.
Exactly. I think it's not a competition with, against the other departments that also have data. Like PM, for instance, they work with data every time. They talk a lot with live ops. So it's really is trying to get back to the developers and give them a full picture of what is happening in their game. So they already have the data related to what people do. And like I said earlier, now they want data to understand why it is happening. And to me, like, two examples, that helped me really prove that data is important, especially related to feedback, to trying to verify, the feedback, is stuff like quality of life improvements, for instance, where, the little things where we think that it's not really a priority, it's not the kind of features that will generate revenue. And I think that's a really tricky thing to say, because you also want to make sure you're not losing revenue, right? So you might not be making more revenue if you work on quality of life improvements, but if you can prove that most of the people who want this kind of improvements are your spenders, or you people who have been in the game for ages, and they just want this little thing to make the game a little bit better, to keep playing every day. That is kind of like the big thing for me as well. Is trying to get back to the studios and tell them, look, this is one thing that a lot of people want right now, and these are the people who want it. And the other thing as well is monetization as well. So we run special offers and bundles over the weekends. The first time it works great, a lot of people buy it, and then the second time not that many people buy it, and then usually what will happen is the developers or the live ops PM will be asking a lot of questions. Is it because they don't need to buy it anymore? Is it because maybe they didn't like it in the first place? And that's a really important thing to understand. It's not because people buy something that they definitely liked what they bought. And some of them would go and complain, but you want to know more. You want to know if most of your player base feel that way. So usually when you go to your dev team and you tell them, I can help you to better understand why they don't want to buy this, or why they didn't buy it because, let's say, they needed to get the offer at the end of the month because they haven't been paid yet. That's a lot of questions to remove. It's a lot of like second guessing, and that's huge in a business like ours. And that's something that community can do as well. Making a long story long, sorry.
No, I mean, I don't know about the audience, but I appreciate it a lot, because it kind of give me an insight on many things, and not just community management in general. So just to quickly summarize this question. So what are you guys saying is that you believe that community data analytics should actually go hand in hand with the personal side of things, because it gives you a fuller picture. So like for example, the example that Tara gave, where they may complain, but you don't really know what they're doing in game, and you've matched these two things together. It gives you a bigger picture of what's exactly happening and how you could actually fix it. So if there's no other questions regarding this question, so I'll go to the next question, which is something that Bogdan has already asked in the Q&A. It's basically, what tools have you guys found to work best for your games when it comes to data analytics?
It's not so much a tool, but just become best friends with your BI team. It's one thing to, use data. It's another to become a master of using BI tools. I think none of us really has the time necessarily. I mean, more power to you if you do, and that's interesting and exciting to you. But, we're community managers. We know how to build relationships and, eventually get what we want. So start building those relationships early with your BI team. Most data folks are, funny enough, most data folks I have worked with at least have been really excited to work on community projects, just because it's different from what they're used to. It's an interesting new challenge. So I've had a lot of people be very, very excited and go above and beyond. And, I asked for a data report on something, and then they come back with a full dashboard because they thought it would be neat to build one. That sort of insight is fantastic. But if you don't build that relationship and you don't have those conversations, then either you're going to have to try to do it yourself, and I'm sorry, but I cannot use Power BI to save my life, or you just don't have access to the information you need. So for me, it's not so much any one tool, like being able to read a dashboard regardless of platform tends to be pretty easy as long as you have somebody walk you through it. Tableau, Power BI doesn't really matter. But having that person who can explain to you where that data comes from and what it actually means can make the world of difference.
Yeah, totally agree. I think it's not so much a question of the tool you want to use, like BA tool, whether it's Amplitude or Tableau. At the end of the day, you get the same thing. I think it's the approach that you need. Yeah, and who you work with, working with BI, PMs, and really, I think there's the question of the integration. How can you make a connection between what happens in your world as a community manager to what happens in the game? Because in my experience, most of the time, you know, a lot of the things that we do impact what I call vanity metrics, which are everything that is on external platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Discord, and so on. But at the end of the day, I get always asked the same question: what did you do to the product KPI? And, you know, eventually I was like, I don't know. I guess I second guess this is what I did and this is what happens. And, you know, one day I just thought maybe, you know, integration is the first thing I should work on with, you know, BI and PM to find a way to make the connection between the two. So yeah, like Tara said, that what you use, the tool you use doesn't really matter that much. It depends on also what you prefer, I guess. But it's definitely the thought process, the approach that you're taking within your organization. Yeah, that would be my answer to your question. Hopefully that answers it.
Yeah, I would actually ask a follow-up question. So I would assume that many of our listeners, they are actually perhaps trying to dabble or start dabbling more on data analytics and community. So do you guys have any like advice for people who are trying to start on like what kind of, how should they do it? Like, for example, could it be surveys, could be a platform, that kind of stuff. And how do you actually make good use of these insights from the community? Because end of the day, there's a lot of data, but what data truly matters, what doesn't? That's the struggle, I feel.
Yeah, that's a $2 million question there.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I'm excited.
No, you can get a lot of things. Yeah. So yeah, I think I think that the first thing you need to look into is, do you feel like you understand what your organization is after, and do you feel like you are able to provide the kind of data that is interesting for the dev team and so on? I think that's a good starting point to at least, you know, see if you can actually get what you need with what you're using. And if not, then the next question is, what do we need and what can we do to get that connection between community users and users in the game? And then obviously it's the matter of what are the developers, what are they after, right? So you can do a lot, community can do a lot on a lot of different things. And that's really important for also, you know, studios to understand that. If you want to invest into community, you can invest a lot. But it's important to know what your studio or your publisher or your developers, what they are after. Some studios are just after anything that could help with their retention. Some are just only after stuff that is related to revenue. And some of them are after everything and anything. But in general, I found it useful to make sure that there is a connection between your community users and all the events, the user properties you have in your games. So, you know, anything that your BI team is using, can you resurface that in whatever you're using to do community management, whether it's in their tools or yours? That would be where I would start if there is nothing related to data in what you do right now.
Yeah, and this is not really the starting point, but I'm going to say it anyway. If you have the opportunity, if you've joined a team before the game has launched, look for every opportunity you can to get those data hooks built in before you launch, even if it's simple, even if your game has a news feed and you allow there to be a little thumbs up button next to that, that is a community interaction with content in the game. That is something that you can start to analyze on the back end. It's like people who are reading the news have spent this much time in the game versus people who aren't interacting with the news. How do we shift that? These little hooks can build to something much bigger later on. So like you don't need to start with the full comprehensive package. If you can, awesome. Like more power to you for getting your team to buy off on that up front. However, anywhere you can find places to surface community and tie that back to the actual user data, specifically in mobile makes it the easiest. That's going to go a very, very long way to proving some of the value of the content that you're creating. So yeah, like start those conversations early, try to get them prioritized in. If you, like I have a PM background, so I'm pretty good at like coming up with V1, V2, V3. But if you don't have that background or you're struggling, pair up with a producer that's friendly and get them to help you scope those different versions and present it back into the team in a way that it doesn't feel like this big, scary, expensive task. It's totally reasonable, and the game doesn't ship for 6 months, so of course we're going to put it on the roadmap. You need to work those conversations as early as possible, because if you get to 2 weeks to launch and you say, hey, I want to integrate this community thing, yeah, right. Like, welcome to maybe that being prioritized 6 months from now.
Yeah, you get the that looks interesting kind of answers, which probably means maybe one day, but most likely not.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, what Tara just said, like anything that is in your game, right? You need to address anything that is related to access, surfacing, and user journey. Of all of that, you use systems that collect information at the same time. You pretty much have the tools. Based on my experience, for instance, I use surveys, and you can use, you know, something as basic as a web collector URL with, you know, custom parameters. You can use cheap survey tools that really don't cost a lot. But if your game already has a system to deliver in-app messages that also collect your user properties, then you're set. You know, you can do surveys to ask anything you want. There is an entire science to do, you know, surveys properly, but you can link answers to user properties and segment the answers in a way that your developers will be like, oh, okay, I didn't think that most of our active players or most of our veteran players hate this feature or barely know about this feature. So it could also be that, again, you have already the tools there to support a way of adding more data to what you do in community development.
Awesome. Sorry, I was muted, so I was talking to myself. Anyway, I just want to quickly summarize. So what you guys have said is that firstly, it's more of like what Nico has said, is more of like begin with your success in mind, kind of know what you're looking for before you actually dive into what the community could provide. Correct me if I'm wrong. And Tara is actually talking more about breaking it into smaller pieces so that it will not be so daunting. So you will not get a, yeah, I will think about it, but which is actually a no from the product team. So it's all very interesting tips. So I'd like to follow up with actually a question which I asked earlier actually. How far the rabbit hole will you go down the analytics to, and where do you call it quits? Because as I mentioned earlier, there's so many data and you don't really know where to like what data to pick. So where do you draw the line basically?
As soon as someone is not interested in what I'm providing, that's just a clear indicator that I should stop gathering that information. So I think it's like, you know, community feedback reports, right? If nobody cares about them, it's maybe because, you know, they're not interested in that kind of stuff. So, I mean, it helps to know, again, what the developers are after or what specific departments are after. So, you know, to give you an example, live ops managers will most likely be interested in only stuff that are related to bundles and special offers and season passes and so on, events, you know, do people, did they like it? So anything related to that stuff, you know, that's for them. So I think what really helps me is going to the different departments, make sure they understand what community can provide, and also set the expectations on what we can provide, what makes sense, and so on. But then also understand what is it that they are after. Do they want sentiment linked to retention, success of selling a bundle, event participation, and so on and so on. So that is kind of what I do. That's kind of the thing that really helps me at some point to say, stop, that is just what I need. The other thing that is quite important as well is to set the expectations, right? For me, providing data when I do, you know, let's say community sentiment reports and so on, this is not this is not what is going to increase revenue or retention or XYZ, right? Some activities we do, yes, and we can prove that. But in general, I like to always set the expectations that most of the work is also done in the game. The game is, at the end of the day, the one thing that will retain your players, that will, you know, monetize your players, and so on and so on. So I think that's really important to make that quite clear as well. Is we're not wizards, right? I think, you know, if community managers had fun, always know the perfect ways to increase revenue by XYZ all the time, well, I think we, you know, it'd be awesome, you know. But yeah, that's kind of like the way I approach it. Talk to your departments, developers, designers, coders, everyone is interested in feedback. And so the expectations on yourself as well. Whatever you do, it will have an impact, but there is so much that you can do as well, right? Don't beat yourself up sometimes. It's just not meant to be.
And another just kind of word of caution is, like, it's really easy to sometimes see correlations where it just doesn't logically make sense. So you want to be wary of, like, effectively turning your data into reading tea leaves, where you're trying to make connections where they don't necessarily really exist. You have to remember that, like, correlation does not mean causation. So it could be easy to go like, oh, okay, everybody playing on this device type seems to really play this one level, and it literally has nothing to do with the device type. So you need to be careful in what sort of recommendations that you're making back out of the data. And this is part of why I say pairing with a good BI person is really useful, especially if that team also includes, like, user research. They can help you make the connections that are, like, really there and help you stay away from the ones that aren't actually there. They just look like they correlate. So kind of once you get down that rabbit hole of, like, I wish I could post a meme, but you're the guy with the pictures all over the wall trying to make connections. When you're trying to force a connection, you're probably going too deep. Most of this is pretty obvious when you look at it. If you're really having to reach, you're probably going over the line.
Yeah, sometimes it's just good to be giving the information and just go with, here it is, and let the people do what you think about it. But yeah, like Charles saying, I think in my experience, that's really true with, you know, like anything that you sell in your games, especially for free-to-play mobile games, where, you know, it's like, well, you know, this bundle didn't sell as good as we thought. Why is this? Well, maybe it's because people don't need to buy it, or because people bought something last time and they absolutely got bad thing that they didn't like, and they just don't trust you anymore. Data from a PM side can't show you that. Like, from a, you know, pure PM, a pure BI side, data won't tell you how your players feel. It will tell you what they do, and that's about it. But then, yeah, like Tara says, you can't, you know, the connection sometimes is just not what you think. So just be careful with that as well. I think it's the way you approach departments, right? With your insights, with your data, with your reports, just be careful. Maybe have, you know, like a say producer or another PM, just have a look at it and say, what do you think about it? Do you think we should include recommendations in this report on what is happening, what we think about it, or what they could do? If they say no, then that's it. Your job is done. And you should feel good about it.
Okay, it sounds like the community management role is evolving so much more than just interacting with people. It's about looking at data, making sense of data. It's also about trying to ensure that it's working with different teams to get the feedback and the insights that each team will want, which is really, really interesting. So this actually leads to my next question, which is actually seeing that community management actually has so many parts right now, like it includes getting insight from your players, also data analytics. So my question to you is, how do you see the future of community management evolve, like down the road?
It's a hard question.
Well, I mean, it's up to you guys. You know, like what do you guys think would be more of the focus? So, I mean, from what we are talking about, I would safely assume that data will be a focus going forward. Is there anything else?
I think we're going to start to see a lot more, what's the right way to put it? Not segmentation of the role, but we're going to start to see specialization within community. So traditionally, community has handled way too much damn stuff, and that's only grown over time. Like just to put it in perspective, when I started in community, community meant a forum. And I had to fight tooth and nail to be allowed to do social media. That was a new thing at that point in time. Today, the scope of the role is, you know, you got to know everything about social media. You've got to be a video editor. You've got to be good on camera. You've got to be able to do live events. It's honestly just too much to put on one single person. So I think you're going to start to see more specialists within community. And I think part of that is going to be a community manager that leans more towards the data and analytics side. So I'm very excited by it because I think there's a lot of opportunity here in kind of crafting the role into something else, like just like production. You have tools producers, you have art producers, you have every type of producer, and those are specializations within the larger umbrella. I think and I hope that we are going to get there with community. In terms of the tools, who knows, man? Like tomorrow, a new social network could come along that changes everything. That's part of why I like the job. I think platforms are going to stop being as segmented as they once were. We're already seeing more with Fortnite and PUBG, where it doesn't matter where you are. You can play the game on your phone. You can play the game on PC. It's all about the game, not necessarily the platform, which means there's just that much more, you know, one, work, but two, exciting work on our end to show the community across platforms and what works best on, you know, on games that live everywhere.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to put it. I think community management, already you say it, like, you know, if you take, you know, 5 different community management job offers, you know, sometimes they look totally different. So there are like a lot of different layers. And like I said earlier, community management can do a lot for your game and for your organization. It's just a matter of knowing what are you after, and depending on what you're after, you need to be specialized in that. Could be, you know, VIP care, could be, you know, social media management, and so on and so on. And like Tara said, I think that there will be community managers who specialized in, you know, this data-driven methods of doing community development and management for your games. Kind of like, you know, what do we need? What can we provide to, you know, as a player success division, kind of. So I think these people will also be driving a lot of you know, R&D as well, just for community, in my opinion. Especially if the company they work for has the resources to to develop tools and so on. That would be kind of the dream, but I'm pretty sure out there, big companies will be looking into how can we do this ourselves. And community managers will be asked, what is it that you need to do what you want? And I think there will be a lot of that as well. How can we make this connection between communities and player base, and how can we help the current games to be better? What I find interesting as well is all the big companies working on a franchise, for instance. They it's more or less always the same community, the same audience. These community managers will help shape or help the developers take a direction in how the next title will look like. So rather than second guessing what is it that people didn't like, they will have a lot of insights on how can we make the next one better and better and better and so on. And that's amazing, the kind of stuff we can do just with user research and data.
Awesome. So you're just basically saying that you feel that the community would be a place where developers could actually gain insight on the next big game. So instead of creating game and then do beta testing, you immediately just look at insights and then to create a game that's more interesting to gamers. Am I right to say that?
I think community will be able to provide insights on what the existing audience is after. Now, if that's something that they want to use, that's up to the development team. But I think, yes, we can provide that kind of insights, yeah.
Yeah, and if you have something like a franchise and you've built through community management a great VIP program with trusted users that you can get insight from, you're already ahead of the game for the next title that you want to release, because you can, obviously you want to pair this with, other needs within the project, etc. But once you've built this really good relationship with some VIP folks, you can get some really solid insight. Whereas if you haven't built up that community, you're kind of flying blind.
Yeah. I think all the different layers that you see within community management will be connected, and it would be like pretty amazing how it would look like. Like you say you have community sentiments, that's the vocal community. What are they saying? And then there will be this data-driven community manager trying to verify if the sentiment is something that most of the player base feels like, agrees with. There'll be, and that's also something that can be useful. Again, VIP care program, where, you're more into the qualitative feedback rather than maybe, quantitative feedback. So yeah, I think there is a lot that we can do, a lot more we can do about retention and also development, which is a huge thing when a business feels better about the direction they can take for a franchise for the next game. That's a pretty big deal in my opinion. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So as some of you might know, I usually do podcasts. So this is the first time we actually change it to a webinar format. And I usually end the podcast with a question for all my guests. So I'm going to ask you guys right now. So if I were to provide you an opportunity to send a voice recording to the past before you just when you start doing community management, what would it be and why? So any one of you could go first, whoever is ready. So perhaps Tara?
That's a hard question. I think for me, like, my story is a bit different in that I didn't want to do community management. I got kind of foisted into it, and I just had the most bandwidth on the team, and I was interested in social media. So I was like, all right, fine, I'll do it, but I'm going back to production after this. So if I was going to record something to tell my previous self, I'd tell them, look, you're going to fall in love with this. Don't be such a shit about it. Like, I was kind of grumpy and irritable about being forced to do this role. And then it became my passion enough that I completely changed my career afterwards. But I just had to get past that grumpy, early 20s. I know what's best for me attitude to understand that this was actually what I really loved doing.
I'm gonna
Awesome,
cheat a
awesome.
little bit. I'm gonna let Tara also send me that one to me, and I'm gonna send myself something as well. Yeah, for me, I think I will definitely encourage myself to believe in what I think and the approaches I want to take and the way I want to expose that to studios as well. I really don't like that word, but you're the expert. You know what I mean? It's like you don't need, most of the time, you don't need someone else to tell you, I don't think it's a good idea. I think you, as a community manager within your organization, you're the person who is the best qualified to expose what you need to do things better and what you can deliver in return. But I think so many times I wish I had been a little bit more, maybe straightforward, or just, not giving up that easily on, I don't know, it's not really a priority. When in fact I was just listening to people who clearly had no idea what community is all about. And I think that's the one thing that we change as well. How do you see the future of community management evolve is that I think, in the really near future, we will see more and more people trusting, what is it that we can do and what is it that you need. And that's a beautiful place to be in. So yeah, I would tell myself, just don't give up that easily sometimes. Just keep hammering a little bit more, Yeah.
It's a good life advice in general, many things. Don't give up too easily.
Yeah, I think it depends on what you're trying to get. But I mean, I don't like to say that, but really, maybe at some point just don't be a dick about it. But really, just know the limits. Anyway.
All right. So now we have headed to our last segment, which is the Q&A segment. So if any one of our audience have any questions at all for our panelists, feel free to raise your hands in the web Zoom function. So I see one person already raised his hand, someone named Ignore. I'm not sure if I got your name correct, so I'm going to allow you to talk, all right? Hi, Ignore, can you hear us? I believe you are muted, Ignore. Are you there? Do you have a question to us? Oh well, I guess he's not answering. Is there anyone else in the audience that wants to ask a question to our panelists? If there is, feel free to put it in the group. I will give you airtime to talk about it. I'll give you like 5 seconds. Oh wait, there's.
Could it be a permission issue with the mute and mute?
Yeah, I'm not too sure what's happening. All right. So, yeah. He asked the question inside the Q&A. All right. All right. So his question is, what methods do you usually use to match user IDs and social profile?
Yeah, it really depends. That you can use tools, but you can also use in-house tools as well. So you can use third parties. So let's say Kitty Play, for instance, we mentioned it earlier. I mean, Joseph did. But the way we used to implement Kitty Play in the games I worked on, the accounts, the forum account was based on the game account. So basically there was no way, but there was no process for the players to create an account. It was automatically created when they first logged into the community hub. So that's a pretty powerful one. You can also use your own account management system. That's, let's say, the one I mentioned earlier with Hand Showdown is a pretty good one. I like it. I like what they did with Drop on Twitch, where you have the Steam account linked to a created account and then linked to your Twitch account. And all of that together is everything you need to see who are you on the forum, what did you do with the drops you got from this campaign, and then how do you use it in the game. But when it comes to data and user research, I use a lot of surveys, and I use web collector URLs. And then if you add custom parameters to your URL, you can then collect your user properties and attach them to answers. And when you get all your results and so on, you can do segmentations, and you can say, I just want to see what spenders only, or rank XYZ, or players who have been in the game from this date. I just want to see their answers. So that's a good way to do it. Unfortunately, there are a lot of trending social media community platforms out there that don't really provide any ways of linking your game accounts to your user IDs. And that's usually where I ask myself, is this something I really want to invest into? Is this something that in the end, I will be able to verify who my players are? I will be able to do ROI reports. Can I do a good integration into my game? So sometimes it's just best to maybe not use them, but it depends also on what you want to do with community. Do you want to do outreach? And also, do you want to verify if your outreach is working? That's a lot of different questions, yeah. But that hopefully answers your questions, yeah.
Awesome. Tara, do you have anything else to add?
Not really. I mean, single sign-on gets you their social profile as part of it. But my favorite is still integrated solutions. Like, obviously, I do have a bias towards KT Play. Anyone can go find the talk that I did about it. But just in terms of, one, the data that you can get back out of it, and two, as Nico said, you don't have a bunch of troll accounts. You don't have an excess of people who aren't actually participating in your game, or one person that's trying to have their voice heard 10 times over with 10 separate accounts. It eliminates a lot of that noise, and you can trust the data a bit more as a result. Versus on social media, I don't know if 20 different Twitter accounts are the same person. Like, you can still do that. It's difficult these days, but it's not that hard to create a new account and come back with the same information again. So integrated solutions that you can trust, the ID tied back to the player, the data is just a bit more trustworthy.
Awesome.
Yeah, I mean, just in general, from my side, when it comes to social media, I call a lot of that vanity metrics, because, well, they can only grow and they just show you that you're growing a platform that is not really linked to your game. So I think, a lot of that is also down to the people creating the community platforms as well. I think they need to understand the needs of developers as well. They need to understand that developers are interested in ways to integrate those social media platforms in their games or their products. So, and again, data. When someone asks me, what are we not on this? And I look at it, and there is absolutely nothing for me to get metrics, even the basics, even vanity metrics. I'm not interested. Like, this is a waste of time for me. So there are limitations, right? And there is little we can do about this.
Awesome. So we have one more question from Andrew. So his question is, how do you fight through the noise to accurately measure community's impact on data?
Do you mean, just want to make sure I understand the question. Do you fight through, is this related to how things are working internally with your different departments, or are you saying about all the different stuff that the community is saying?
I believe he had a follow-up. Give me a minute. Let me get the follow-up out. Noise being defined as marketing's influence on retention, UA, etc., etc.
If you've got the right oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, if you have the right data and you have the right information, you can clearly show that they were existing players. So Of course, there's no clear line between marketing and community. Sometimes one will impact the other, and there's always a little overlap. But if you can consistently show that, like, hey, these people who participate in the community have retained this much longer, and it's not tied directly to, you know, say a marketing campaign or a UA campaign where you would see a clear spike in the data or a fairly substantial difference, it's easier to kind of normalize that back out of like, hey, this is primarily due to community's influence versus marketing's influence. UA, it'll be a bunch of new users, so that's pretty easy to like parse out. Like, okay, we spent a lot of UA money, now we have a lot more users, they're giving us this sorts of information. That's still valid, useful information, especially if your game is like several years old and you get an influx of new users. The feedback that they give you may be vastly different from what the older players give you, and that's super interesting and important. But you should, you know, provided you've set things up right, you should be able to compare and contrast that and show that, like, hey, these are clearly new players, these are older players, these are players that participate in community, these are players that don't. Granted, that relies on an integrated solution. Looking at just folks from social media, it's a lot more gray, it's a lot more noise.
Yeah, for me, two things. So the first one is so if you do something like ahead of time, kind of like announce who you're going to target. So you kind of claim that this is the people we're going to impact. So if you're doing something really specific, like let's say reveal campaign, and granted again, this relies heavily on integrated solutions. But you can also find way with, you know, let's say your social media managers, you do something on social media and then you have an ads flyer linking back into the game. You can still track who clicks on those one. You can ask to use the same tools as well. So I've done that as well, where, you know, I get the same kind of links that UA uses, only for my activities. And then I see these are the people who, let's say, play the game, saw an announcement, went back into the game. So that's yours, and you can prove it. And the other thing as well that sometimes work is like, well, they didn't need to prove anything, so why should I? And I know it's not really a solution because it's not really, you know, helping immediately, but it's so that's the thing, is how do other people prove that what they're doing is actually having an impact? Quite frankly, sometimes nobody is actually proving anything. It's just assuming again that this is our work because, well, we were the only one doing something. So I think that's one thing as well that helps me. Sometimes when I get asked, how can you define or prove that this is your doing? I ask the same question, like, why, how do other departments do it? Maybe that will help me to do it. And it turns out sometimes you find tools that you could reuse as well. So just again, to give you examples, if you do some stuff on social media, have your own ads flyers, your own links linking back into the game. Let's say you're promoting a bundle on social media, you have an integration that sends the players back into the shop to that specific bundle, and anything that happens is basically yours.
Oh yeah, another fun one off of that, just briefly, is if you do a like giveaway on social media, like, hey, you know, enter this code or click this link to get 100 free coins in the game. Make sure, like, very specifically that you have your own referral link for that, and then work with your data team or even your monetization team to show that, okay, we gave this free thing away, but we also put a sale on the same day, and the result was we made 1.2x revenue versus a normal day without a giveaway. Because a lot of times teams get a little nervous about giving anything away, with some good reason, but when you can show that sort of correlation directly, yes, don't overuse it. It loses its impact really fast, but it makes it a lot more easy to say, like, hey guys, Halloween's coming up. We want to do something really cool. I'd like to do a giveaway. When you can show that that's probably going to actually have a positive impact on monetization, not a negative one, you'll get the go-ahead much easier.
And if you still need to, you know, you use this and you still have to kind of prove, you know, define the impacts of what you're doing. Again, I think that something that helped me a lot is user research with surveys and so on, trying, I think the future of communities is also going to actually, chasing the feedback, kind of like provoking the users to give us the feedback that we want, that we need, rather than just waiting for it. So sometimes I just ask, how did you get into the game? Or have you seen XYZ that we did? And this is again somewhere, like it's a little bit easier based on my experience to get the data and prove that these are users that have seen our posts, that have seen our community activities, and this is what they thought about it. You can also do that. You can also ask your users, did you like our recent Facebook post? Are you actually on Facebook? XYZ and so on. So that helps a lot as well. Yeah, hopefully that answers the question.
Awesome. Thanks guys for really taking your time to really explain it in depth, because it's really very insightful. So I'm learning a lot as well. So if there's no more questions, which I think we are a bit over time as well. So thank you everyone for joining us in this event. If you'd like to reach out to any one of us, feel free to reach out our LinkedIn's or to Nicolas or Tara's Twitter. And I would sincerely appreciate if you guys could scan the QR code at the top right-hand corner and do a survey for us. This survey is actually more of like me understanding how do you find this event and what kind of topics are you interested in next, so that we could actually do a better one for you guys next week. With that, thanks everyone. And I believe we have reached the end of our webinar. Thanks again, Nico and Tara, for doing this with me.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us. It was lots of fun.
Yeah, I learned a lot as well. So I hope it's the same for the listeners. And goodbye, everyone. I'm going to end it in a bit. Thanks,
Bye.
guys. Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye. Let me guess.
Oh, we're still here.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, shall we take a screenshot and just to, like, I don't know, as a memory and for me to
Sure, sounds good.
with a cat. That would be an awesome memory. All right, give me a minute. All right. How do I take a screenshot? All right, 3, 2, 1. All right.
I still see 13 participants, and I'm like, they're probably still watching this us taking this screenshot.
Well, we are.
Look at those clowns over there.
Well, let's do it in 3, 2, 1. 3, 2, 1. Awesome.
That's the best part.
That's the best part.
The bloopers.
All right, now I'm going to end this call for real good. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.